right, my AP language friends, Kristian Kuhn coming at you again, affectionately known as the Bob Ross of composition. And as promised, I'm going to be running through all the AP exams, all FRQs, 1, 2, and 3 from 2015 all the way to the present moment, which takes us to FRQ 2 from the 2023 exam. Rita Dove's commencement address. So what I'll do in this is kind of stick to status quo. If you're familiar with my work, you know that I start with a blank canvas, and a la Bob Ross, I will fill that canvas up with introductory paragraphs, body paragraphs, and conclusion paragraphs. So by the time of the end of this presentation, you should have a full understanding as to how to cobble together this essay from top to bottom. And then going one step further, you should know how to tackle all of the FRQ2s going forward while manipulating my heuristics. So without further ado, let's unpack the prompt, and then I'll show you how to piece this whole thing together with some exemplars that I wrote for you. So the prompt says, on May 21st, 2016, the poet Rita Dove delivered a commencement address to graduating students at the University of Virginia at Charlottesville, where she was a professor of English at the time. Dove received a Pulitzer Prize for her poetry and served as the United States Poet Laureate from 1993 to 1995. She also writes in a variety of genres, including fiction and drama. The following is an excerpt from her speech. Read the passage carefully. Write an essay that analyzes the rhetorical choices Dove makes to convey her message about what she wishes for her audience of graduating students. And I would say this is a fair game prompt. There's nothing tricky about this whatsoever. The College Board did not throw you a zinger in 2023. This is common fare rhetorical analysis prompt. So let's ask ourselves the following question as we stare at our blank sheet of paper, our blank computer screen, our blank canvas. So, how do I write the introductory paragraph? Before I answer that question, let me state this. With my students, I always paint with and for them. So I always tell my students that I'm going to Bob Ross my instruction, and what I mean by that is this. I'm going to get to the proverbial easel and canvas, and I'm going to paint 3 introductions for you. Usually that's the key to demystifying things. If I show you 3 times how to do it, you in turn can execute it all on your lonesomes. But here's the kicker. Bob Ross used a heuristic known as the wet on wet technique every single time he did a natural landscape painting, and every time I do introductory paragraphs in the expository modes, I either declare or invert. And I'll show you in just a second here. With rhetorical analysis, we always declare. And then the body paragraphs I tackle with the syllogistic method heuristic. And then there are some conclusion stems that I like to wrap things up. But I got some top secret information for you. I think the College Board would have a warrant for my arrest if I were to tell you this, but I'm going to tell you anyways. I think in all of the rhetorical analysis prompts, there are implicitly hidden 2 questions, and they are as such. How does the author construct meaning, and what is the authorial intent? My friends, my students, if you successfully ascertain a correct meaning of the text, meaning you read it accurately and you parcel out everything that you need to from that reading, and you answer these 2 questions, you will unquestionably all day long earn the thesis point. But I'm going to show you how to do it with pizzazz and flair and some spunkiness so that you can put yourself in contention for that unicorn point, also known as the elusive sophistication point. So here's what you're going to do. We're going to declare the thesis, and you're going to take 3 sentences to answer that first question. How does the author construct meaning? Because it's not a single term device technique. Usually you got to find like 3 of them that comprise the whole construction of meaning. And then you're going to take 1 sentence for the authorial intent. So one of the things that I do with my students is this. Before we write, you clearly got to read. And I tell my guys to go term, device, technique hunting. So as you read, look for the most salient, the most germane terms, devices, techniques that are available to you. This takes a lot of practice. I find that my students don't struggle with the writing once they learn my heuristics. That kind of writes itself. It just kind of becomes intuitive, instinctual, habitual. But the reading takes a lot of practice. So practice your hand at reading and go hunting for everything that you see in this commencement address. So let's break down the declarative thesis. So as I said, you begin with the thesis. Whenever you answer the question, how does the author construct meaning? That constitutes or comprises the thesis statement. So you got to drop the terms, the devices, the techniques in that opening sentence, but you don't want to have it be a dumping ground. You don't want to like front load it with like 16 terms, devices, techniques. So you're going to focus on the most salient, the most germane, the most relevant. You're also going to sprinkle in a little bit of context and background, kind of with like a heavy thematic focus. Don't regurgitate the commencement address and say, Dove did this first, Dove did this second, Dove did this next, right? You're not writing plot analysis, you're doing rhetorical analysis. So don't get summative. You also want to sprinkle in some tier 2 level vocabulary because it is an academic paper. And by tier 2, I simply mean your average run-of-the-mill SAT level caliber words. Sentence constructs. This gets pretty interesting here. In my YouTube channel, I have several videos on Strunk and White's rule number 18, in which they make the assertion that there are 12 sentence types. So you can practice your hand at writing those 12 sentence types, but there's also 20 ways to pattern a sentence. So you're going to see in my writing, hopefully, if I did it right, me be a syntactical ninja. I don't want you paralleling your sentences. Struggling and emerging writers, young writers often over-rely on independent clauses and short, simple declarative sentences. And you don't want to do that, right? That's too dutiful, too plotting, too elementary. So you got to beef it up a little bit and manipulate your syntax in order to achieve voice, rhythm, and flow, which, tying back to my earlier sentiment, is wildly necessary for you to be in contention for the sophistication point. And as you've probably already done the math, this is going to be 4 sentences long. So let's recap that. 3 sentences, construction of meaning. 1 sentence, authorial intent. So let's jump right in and take a look at exemplar number 1. So you can see the first 3 sentences, I'm going to use my terms, devices, techniques. 1 sentence is just going to focus on authorial intent. Some of your teachers might refer to that as universal theme, universal truth, exigence. So however they cloak their language, I'm just going to say authorial intent. So let's give this a whirl. Primarily through anecdote and enumeration. So do you see how I said it right out of the gate? 2 terms. I think the anecdote and enumeration are key. I think they're the most important things, so I'm going to drop it first. So primarily through anecdote and enumeration, Dove chooses to go the route of the poet in the guise of a nightingale instead of a hardline advice giver in her commencement address to UVC. Embracing her ethos as a former poet laureate and accomplished presence in the world of academia, she waxes the extension of her wisdom anecdotally and through a series of negations. So I noticed that she negates a lot of her language. So I'm going to put that in here. I think that's really important. Placing herself in the company of other established artists. So that's part of her ethos, that correlation she draws. She expounds upon the various ways these graduates can lead lives as extraordinary as hers. Given that life is not always a smooth ride, her main point is that no matter what, anyone can overcome life's obstacles if they put forth an effort that exceeds the limits of mere preparedness. So that's my authorial intent sentence. Note that my vocab is up throughout this. right? I don't sound like a goon. I don't sound contrived. I don't sound pretentious, but I sound academic. So you don't want to overdo it. The idea is not that if you use a million dollar words that somehow you're committing yourself to good writing, but you want to be academic in nature. Also note that I am not paralleling my syntax at all. A good way to kind of spot check that is look at your preceding sentence and say, I don't want to mirror that sentence in my next sentence, and just alter every time. Variation is key. Students might be scratching their heads saying, geez, I need to see that again. And that's why I model things 3 times. So let's do that again. Again, I'm going to go 3 plus 1. Heavy on the terms, devices, techniques in the first 3 sentences. Towards the end, just a simple statement of the authorial intent. So check this one out. From the vantage point of a long list of accomplishments, so that I'm implying the enumeration, everything from being a former poet laureate to an esteemed White House guest, Dove decides it best to not dispense a tepid listing of life advice, but to instead gift the graduates of UVC with other sweet sounds. And it's kind of the exigence of the piece and her ethos. Chiefly through anecdote, she enumerates all of her wishes for these young graduates as they embark upon their life's journey. Aligning herself with other accomplished artists, she implores her audience to hone in on their preparedness as they face the inevitable ups and downs of life. Much like herself, if these graduates embrace the tenets of her wishes, they too can overcome anything and lead lives of remarkable quality. It's the exact same thing as number 1, 3 plus 1. My vocab is up. My sentence structures are very supple and flowing. I have good voice, rhythm, flow. It's academic sounding. And I've highlighted the 3 most salient, germane, relevant terms, devices, techniques. And that's what I always shoot for is 3. Sometimes a piece is really juicy, so I'll drop 4. All right, students might be saying, man, this is hard, but yes, you can do this. It's really easy. So let me show you one more time just to really unwrap things and demystify the process. Leaning on her long list of accomplishments as a poet and academic, Dove deviates from the typical script of a run-of-the-mill commencement address and embraces her inner nightingale to deliver a few pearls of wisdom to the graduating class of UVC. Enumerating her ardent wishes for them, she anecdotally details a few tales of her life in hopes of inspiring these young and aspiring graduates. In comparing her story to the lives of other great artists, including the life of her father, she emphasizes her main point. To live a stellar life, one must focus on their preparedness, and that's the exigence. Knowing that their lives will not always be smooth sailing, she encourages the graduates to live with passion and an embracing will to tackle it all. Always 4 sentences, always 3 plus 1. Focus on that vocab. You got to have, ample, sufficient tier 2 in there. And then those sentence constructs have gots to be varied. All right, good place to pause and try it yourself. So students, show your writing to each other. I'm convinced that the more writing you see, the better you become. If teachers are watching this, paint along. Give your students a few more exemplars. Try your hand at it and see how your students are doing from your lead. Still a lot of canvas left. We still have a long way to go, so we have to ask ourselves the following question. So, how do I write the body paragraphs? And as always, you're going to proceed syllogistically. And this is where the FRQs really get demystified as far as body paragraphs go, because for Lang, all 3 FRQs, I go syllogistically. For Lit, all 3 FRQs, I go syllogistically. And even when I'm doing non-AP work like research papers and things of that nature, I always go syllogistic. So let me break down what this heuristic is. It's rooted in the Aristotelian tradition. Aristotle ran a school called the Lyceum, and the town's boys would go there to learn about polemics, oration, debate, wordsmithing, word wrangling, and they'd often throw out these juicy essential questions And you'll see them in some of the seminal texts. And one is Plato's Republic, in which the essential question is, what is justice? And the think tankers, the philosophers, the students would step to the proverbial mic and they would drop their definition. And Aristotle noted, some of these kids are really good at argumentation. Some are not. What are the really good students doing? And one day he had a eureka moment and he said, I got it. They have like a mathematical, computative, calculative approach to their arguments. And he coined it the syllogistic method. And all that means is that kids are going in a formulaic way from premise to conclusion. So if I were to say to you, arsenic is deadly, you'd nod your head and say, Kristian, you're absolutely correct. But if I follow it up with the second premise, stating my dog ate arsenic, you would naturally conclude my dog is going to die. That's not going to bode well, Kristian, for your dog. Sorry, right? So that's what a syllogism looks like. How do we morph that into a heuristic for the purposes of performing rhetorical analysis? The first premise is going to be 3 sentences long, and we're going to drop our terms, devices, techniques. It has to be an argument, right? We got to remember this is expository writing. It is an act of argumentation. So we need to argue using the terms, the devices, techniques. I like for my students to take 3 sentences because it keeps the centrality of the argument. All too often when I read College Board sample papers, students begin to plot summarize up top in 1, 2, and 3, and therefore they're not meeting the demands of the assignment. They are in fact writing cliff notes, they're writing plot summation, and not rhetorical analysis. So 3 sentences really ensures that you meet the demands of the assignment. Beginning in the 4th sentence, I like to see textual support inserted in the form of quoting and paraphrasing. And ideally, you want to teeter-totter balance that. Don't do one far more at the expense of the other. And then the last thing is body paragraphs need conclusions. That's right, kids. Body paragraphs need to be concluded. And this is where you're going to go back to the prompt. You're going to go back to the thesis, and it's like a link, an echo, a promise. It all comes full circle. And then the big to boot, this is going to take 10 to 12 sentences. That's what a body paragraph should look like, 10 to 12 sentences. So let's examine a first premise. My students often ask me, where do I begin? And I'm not a big fan of templates because I think we front load too many words for our students and it becomes too paint by number and formulaic. But I do have a training wheel if students need it. And it's just 4-word stem right from the onset, comma. And that, if you use it, cues your reader into knowing that you are organized, that you have a real good methodological approach. You're going to be very calculative and exacting, going top to bottom. So you start where Dove starts and just work your way methodically through it. So use it if you want to as a training wheel, as a scaffold. If you don't want to use it, use something closely akin to that. And let's look at it. So I got to drop the terms, the devices, the techniques. Right from the onset, Dove immerses her accomplished persona right into the central spotlight of her address with a slight twist of humor. So I got ethos and pathos there implied. She decides to follow the dictates of her inner poet and break from the cliche and predictable nature of the typical commencement address. And that's the exigence, right? She's going to do it different. As a preeminent literary figure, she finds it best to fictionalize her intent and bestow wishes instead of empty advice. All right, so let's break that down. The first premise, 3 sentences, focus on the rhetorical terms, devices, techniques. From here, I got to go quote hunting. I promised you, right? If the first premise is a promise, I promised you that I would talk about those 3 things, right? I dropped 3 terms in there, devices, techniques. So now I need quotes and or paraphrases for all 3. So spend some time quote hunting for those and make sure that you keep the promise of the first premise. Aristotle used the word cogency. Your composition teachers, especially the College Board, talk about line of reasoning. I talk in terms of the promise of the first premise. So I need quotes and or paraphrases for all three of those things. So here it is. Immediately, Dove leans on the fact that she's a former poet laureate with a long list of accolades and announces that although she's given commencement speeches before, this one is different. This is personal. So let's talk about how that quote got silky smooth. How is that perfectly embedded in there? I use something called the 5-word rule, and it's this. If a student uses a minimum of 5 words, so not exactly, but a minimum of 5 words, and keeps the quote relatively small, bracket as needed, it should sound conversational, and that's what you're shooting for. You don't want chunky, abrupt, brusque quote transitions. That's not going to get you the sophistication point. We quote, we got to analyze. Typically, commencement addresses strictly adhere to a prescriptive formula. In fact, as she states rather flippantly, she Googled it, so it must be true. Her purpose is to dispense life advice. So I'm in the exigence here. I'm in the ethos. I promised you that these quotes are perfectly aligned and synced with my promise. But in her first of several references to famous artists, she draws upon an opening line from one of literature's most accomplished poets, Percy Bysshe Shelley. Given that Dove, an accomplished poet herself, agrees with the sentiment of one of literature's best, Dove decides to embrace her contrary fairy godmother and wily genie to extend the graduates a few wishes. So I'm into her ethos right now, like the persona that she's copying. Enumerating her 3 gifts, she begins by saying, I wish you hunger. In her first 2 such decrees, Dove immediately negates the denotative implications of the statement and clarifies her remark by stating that she does not mean psychological want, but a continued spiritual and intellectual appetite, a hunger to know more, do more, feel more. Later, in her second wish, she qualifies her wish of hard work by commenting that she does not mean back-breaking labor, but the drudgery of the treadmill, but an appreciation for the work that comes before the big show. So you can see here, by extension, I'm getting the syntax out of the way because syntactically the most important thing is the enumeration and the negation. So check that off the list. With both wishes, Dove is speaking figuratively in that she wants these graduates to embrace the fundamental purpose of an education, to forever remain intellectually engaged and to put forth their best self at every phase of the game. All right. I could end there, but I'm really truthfully not done. I got to conclude this and get back to the prompt, back to the thesis, and go full circle. My conclusions usually are a sentence or 2, no more. You just got to be real quick about it. So here's my conclusion for this first body paragraph. By throwing the typical script out the window, Dove is able to suggest that the foundation she built for herself to be as accomplished as she is can be attained by these graduates. They just need to embrace the wishes and do the work. And that, my friends, is how I would do my first body paragraph. Again, if you're writing with me, painting with me, good place to pause and try your hand at a first premise. Use that stem right from the onset or something closely akin to that. 3 sentences in which you drop the terms, the devices, the techniques. I like proceeding this way because it prevents students from going 1 paragraph tone, 1 paragraph syntax, 1 paragraph ethos, 1 paragraph pathos. That's too drudging, dutiful, and plotting. It's going to preclude you from getting the sophistication point. So I like multitasking in that first premise. But we are not done. We have to ask ourselves, what do we do next? And the answer is going to surprise you and shock you. You bust out another syllogism. This is only a 4-paragraph essay. Intro, 2 bodies, and a conclusion. So we're at the middle of the commencement speech, at the point where I finished my first body paragraph. So I always ask myself, what's left? What's left to do? And there's so much to do. So again, I'm going to write a first premise, 3 sentences long, drop the terms, devices, techniques that are left or still need further coverage, change up my quotes. I'm going to go quote hunting and then wrap it all up 10 to 12 sentences. And that's what I'll do for the second body paragraph. Now let's shift to the end of the essay and wrap it all up. We need to throw a conclusion on it. And I have some scaffold, some training wheels early in the academic year for my students in terms of some average run-of-the-mill conclusion stems. I always liken the conclusion to the grand finale of a fireworks display. And again, you're hammering the exigence, the universal truth, the universal theme, right? The authorial intent. So anything that's all-encompassing, language like simply said, evidentially, in no other words, when it's all said and done, at the end of the day, are really nice ways to wrap things up. It's not the most profound way to do it, but as a training wheel to get you to do something more like mine here at the end is where you want to go. So look at mine. I'm going to use one of our sentence stems that my students use quite often. And check it out. When one boils down all the possible pearls of wisdom, one could bestow upon a graduating class, right? So you can see there, big emphasis on the exigence. Dove's wish list offers a unique twist. If the soul stays hungry, prepares without relent, and embraces the rocky times, life can be a very special journey. Having lived by the rules of these wishes, Dove is a perfect case in point to verify the truth of her statements. And my conclusions, I usually wrap it all up in 3 or 4 sentences and call it a day at that. And that, my friends, is how I would cobble together an FRQ2 for the purposes of performing rhetorical analysis. Happy teaching, happy writing, and if you need to contact me for anything, teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. For real, reach out to me if you have any questions or if you want me to look over your shoulder. I don't mind. I consider it to be an honor and a blessing when people are using my heuristics. So it's kind of flattering to me when you reach out to me. So don't hesitate. Teachers that are watching this, know that I am a lead teacher for the National Writing Project. I present for NCTE and Perfection Learning quite a bit throughout the calendar year. So if you want to see my comings and goings, go to my webpage, www.teachinghowtowrite.com. I got some free resources on there and a calendar of my events. If you would like me to push into your school and do a professional development for your English department, I do that as well. So just drop me an email and we can talk the scope of your vision. For students, if you want to work with me, you can visit my webpage or drop me an email. I have something called Write at Ivy Write, and I help students with their college personal statements. So I am a graduate of Brown University. I did my graduate degrees there, and I used to work in admissions there as well. And I'm quite professional at getting kids to write some killer personal statements. Or if you want to qualify this exam with flying colors, let's work together. I can tutor you. So Write at Ivy Write, drop me an email and we'll talk specifics. So that's it from here. That's the end. I am going to do videos from 2015 all the way to the present for AP Lang and AP Lit. Tell your friends, tell your colleagues, spread the good word, have everyone subscribe, and I will keep them coming. I'll see you in the next writing workshop.